So I've got a slightly different role, I think, in this get-together. I think we've heard some fabulous stuff on, you know, where the technologies of acquisition are going, and you know, who would disagree that much of what we have to gain out of geophysics is going to come from the new methods of acquisition. I think it's absolutely the case. I sort of live in the world that tries to take those results and take the results of processing and put them together with the well data. And the well data is very abundant in the world these days. You know, we've had hundreds of years of drilling wells, and I guess one of my takes on this talk is, you know, we have all this information about the rocks. If we can systematize the usage of that and drive it towards the geophysics, then we gain an enormous amount. And there are, you know, companies out there, IHS has already been mentioned, who are, you know, systematizing the databases that have taken hundreds of years, untold trillions of pounds to develop. So, you know, a little bit of rock thrown into geophysics goes a long way. I suppose it's part of the story here. So let me see whether this thing works. Oh yeah, here we go. Okay, so structure of the talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about why, if you like, the why for the predicate. A little bit about rock physics, but I promise you no equations. And certainly when I look through the list of people who are coming, I think 35 were recognizable geophysicists. Now I'm not quite sure what the mix here is here at the moment, but can everybody put their hands up who've got some geophysical background in the room? Blimey. Okay, so that's about 50%, so I was down a little bit on my 30% here. So some of this might actually be a little bit too simple for you, but as Dave's said, you know, a lot of the stuff you can take for granted. I'm not so sure about that. You know, my business comes into contact with geologists and geophysicists all the time who do not have that knowledge of how to put the rock physics or the geology together with the geophysics. So maybe in the big companies it's, you know, it's well systematized, but at the sort of independents and certainly the smaller independents, it's still sort of, you know, rare knowledge. I wouldn't say black art, it's getting out there. So I'm going to talk a little bit about rock physics and some of the basics, using field analogs. Where do we get all this information from? Where does the applicable rock physics come from? And then really going to get into the examples and going to give you a couple of exploration examples, development example, and then a production, including time-lapse. I'm not going to talk about storage, though that is a tremendously exciting area, which I think most of us would know. So, a little bit about the company. We basically do this kind of stuff for a living, as you'd expect. About 90 people in the company, grown in about the last 6 years, 70 clients, including all the super majors, most of the independents. And one of the things that we've done over this time is build up an extensive domain knowledge, if you like. The number of wells we've analysed, the number of core examples we have, the number of field outcrops, if you like, that we've studied to bring together to be able to extract the meaning out of geophysics is really quite large. And we brought that together in a sort of standard software platform, the RockDoc platform, which a number of people, I spot a few clients in the room. So that's really the point, is that the areas that we've explored and produced in the world so far, I think we all know where they are, we all know where the sweet spots are, and there's literally thousands of wells out there. I think we've looked at something like, if you look at the pressure data and the rock physics data, we've looked at something like 15,000 wells since 2001, so that's quite a number of wells working through it. And it's really bringing out what are the attributes that you could actually look for in the seismic data or in the EM data or whatever geophysics you're looking at. That's the point here. So, I mean, here's my sort of take on it. You know, the geophysics profession exists to sort of make predictions at a distance about rock properties. That distance can vary enormously from, you know, maybe a few meters in the case of things like ground penetrating radar, down to, you know, extraordinary things that we're seeing in places like the Gulf, 35,000 feet type wells, and you know, we've seen the potential for going much deeper down to the remote. So it's a remote measuring tool. Increasingly, we're either looking at really super complicated areas that we haven't been able to image to date, or we're looking at more stratigraphic traps. And most of the examples I'm going to talk about are more into the stratigraphy and lithology side of the business and the structure. There's some extraordinary things going on, as we know, in the subsol. and subphosphate basalt, I understand. Rocks are very complicated objects, and in fact, a colleague of mine did a very good paper, I think in '96, for the engineering worlds, where he described rocks as being almost like living organisms. They have structure. They can, you put them into different environments. They change their reactions to the environment. They take on imprints of the environment. So there's an element of memory, if you like. I think reproduction is going a bit far, but you get the picture. I mean, they're not simple, items made up of monocrystals or granules, etc. So they're very complex. So to go into and make a remote measurement and pull out of that, the kind of information we want, including things like permeability, is a tall order. But we're up for it. I think the industry is going for that kind of information if we can. There's a lot of uncertainty to handle at these kind of depths and remoteness, and certainly one of the issues is matching things at different scales, and I'll just briefly touch on that because it really adds quite an interesting aspect to what we're trying to do. So we've got this reservoir to borehole scale type transformation. So as I said, the structure and geometry tracks, mainstream stuff. Lithology and geology is really what we want out of it. We also want to know the fluids and the injectivities because we want this stuff to go both ways. Pressures and temperatures, again, something that we can get out of an increasing importance of the new plays and shale plays, the enhanced oil recovery. So quite a variety of information. Fluid flow I put at the bottom. I haven't seen a convincing argument except in indirect, although people have talked about things like attenuation perhaps giving us some clues into that as well. So that's really the scope. The whys, I think, we've been talking a little bit about money. Drilling's expensive. There's also a bit of an argument that the information gathering aspects of drilling wells, which I think as geophysicists we're most keen on, sometimes are at odds with the engineering and production aspects of drilling wells. So you can sometimes find yourself, particularly as expense goes up, getting into a bit of a conflict there with your yet another area of conflict with the production engineer, reservoir engineer. Geophysics is still cheap, I think, even with the demand that we're seeing at the moment. However, geophysics is ambiguous, as we all know. So what we're talking about here, the rock physics side of things, role is to constrain, calibrate, and to integrate to get the most value. And this is just a diagram which purports to show that, I think, with rock physics being at the centre of pulling together EM, regional isotopic gravity, seismic, various sites, well scale, rock scale, etc. We can bring all these things together. Kind of things we wanted to know, obviously coming out of the reservoir are the hydrocarbon pore volumes, structure, pressure, net growths, fractures, porosity, permeability, etc. These feed into the decisions that we've taken investments. I'm not going to talk too much about the holy trinity of velocity, density, PS, VP, VS, and rho, and all the other aspects we want. I think I can make the assumption that most of you know what it is we want to get out of science data. So I'm going to talk instead more about the rocks and what the rocks bring into the sort of geophysical world. Rock physics, a lot of equations, but that really is a bit of a tease, so I'm not going to talk about it very much. So let's talk about what does rock physics bring to the static reservoir model. Well, inversion is a good way that we can handle seismic data. It's got some issues. We usually do it vertically. It usually results in some kind of impedance. It can be model-based, fast type. There are at least 20 types of inversion that I've seen in the literature.